Hi. Last week I went to the EuroSTAR conference in Copenhagen as a guest, as a visitor rather than a speaker. But interestingly enough, Graham Freeburn asked me as programme chair to contribute a keynote talk at short notice, which I did because one of the speakers couldn't make it to the show. So it was a pleasure for me to do that, and I'm always prepared to help out. At any rate, I gave my talk. It was called Testing, Engineering, Tools and Futures. And there were a whole lot of Slido comments and questions which came up, and also on the Hoover kind of website, conference website. And what I want to do in this video is to reply to some of the questions, most of them, about 90%. There's a bit of duplication in the questions, so I've reduced the number a little bit. But what I want to do is just respond to some of the comments. And if you like, what I've done is I've sequenced them to make a kind of narrative, if you like, to make it a bit more reasonable and readable and understandable. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this in one take and hopefully treat it like a live session where questions come in live and I respond accordingly. Let's see how that goes. Now, to set some context for the questions, I'm just going to summarise one slide, which is how I kind of closed, if you like, in the talk itself and talked about what I call an interactive test environment. And essentially what it is like it's a vision for a tool set for testers whose presentation to the user, to the tester, is similar to an interactive development environment, which is basically a developer kind of context. But the mechanisms and the facilities and features available cover a whole host of areas, not just test execution. What I want to have available to the tester is a tool which acts as a proxy between the tester and the system under test. And in that respect, every keystroke, every piece of data entered through keys and button clicks is captured. Regardless of whether you're going to rerun those tests or not, I want all that information captured. And behind the scenes, I want the tool to use that information captured to build a model. That is, if you like, a graphical representation of the layouts of the screen, the sequence of fields, the keystrokes, the valid data, and so on. But behind the scenes, I also want the tool to monitor network traffic to and from my system under test, my client, if you like, my PC or mobile. I want those HTTP messages interpreted, and I want them analysed behind the scenes. I want to know what's going on in the database, and I want a monitoring of the database so that when I click a button, I know exactly what data has changed behind the scenes. I'd also like to know what's happening elsewhere on the environment, if that's possible. So from the point of view of the monitoring, the logging that's going on in the application code at the back end, I'd like access to that. And I also want either created by the tool or maybe created by myself, either ahead of time or live, is the relationship between features of the system and the data that's changing in the back end and the messaging that's going to and from various servers. So what I want is, I want it all. I want all the data that's conceivably available to me, and I want in the background the machine learning and AI to analyse that data to, if you like, come up with ideas for what I should do next as the tester. So, if you like, what I want is the tool to help me by giving me suggestions, reporting on what's going on, and also maybe doing testing behind my back. So one of the things I suggested last week was if I leave my workstation running with the tool might say, you know what, while I'm just hanging around for doing nothing much in particular, there are some tests I think I should run. And If you like, as a tester, I'd really quite like that. I'd want the tool to try some stuff out that it thinks might find some bugs, that might reveal some useful information. At any rate, there are four modes, if you like, of the operation of the tool. The first one is what I've called survey mode. And survey, call it exploratory mode. I'm exploring the system under test. But as I survey, as I explore the system under test, the tool is building a model so it can recognize future tests done by myself or by anyone in the team who's accessing this system. Then I have edit mode. And edit mode is where I can tinker with the model. I can edit the data values going into the system. I can adjust for mistakes that I make in my exploration and so on. But essentially I want to be able to auto-generate test cases based on the sample data that I've manually entered, but there might also be exploration of the back-end database to find test data that I want to reuse for the pathways I've covered in my exploration. Interactive test mode is where, a bit like a debugger, where I can step through sequences through the pathways I've already covered in my exploration to execute a transaction step by step by step and observe what's going on and maybe interrupt the test or to carry on the test to completion in an automated way. But I want interactive control over testing done by the tool. Now finally, when I'm comfortable that the tool can run tests in an unattended mode, I want that mode too, needless to say. Now here are the questions that came up, and there's about 18 or 20, I haven't counted them, but there's quite a number. Let me read it out. You stated that you want a tool that follows the human tester to automate the tests for future repetition. Isn't this what record and playback tools from early 2000 aim to do? Well, yes and no. Yes, the tool will record information that it can reuse to replay a test. That's for sure. But it's not recording code in the way that most test execution tools do today in record mode. What I want to do is to record the existence of all the elements on screen, all the buttons, all the fields. I want the tool to recognize that there are various pathways as I navigate from screen to screen, from field to field, and so on. So if you like, yes, there's a record and playback kind of concept, but it's not recording code. It's recording a model, and if you like, macros, which allow individual elements to be manipulated by the tool, or I can get into code perhaps to edit those snippets, those macros, to do particular things. But I want to suggest it's not the same as the old capture replay of code. Why would we need a tool to track our explorations and compose a model, whilst the model could or should have been the basis of the code of development? This is an interesting one. So essentially, model-based testing historically has been about creating very formal models from which you can auto-generate code. And from those very same models, you can auto-generate tests. Now, the good thing about that is, yes, there's a lot of automation involved in generating both code and testware. But the problem with that is if you use exactly the same model to generate code and tests, those tests will reflect the same assumptions the tool makes when it generates the code. And so they're not independent tests in that respect. So there's good news and bad news about model-based testing done in that way. There's a lot of automation. You can pat yourself on the back that you've got code plus tests that run to perfection, but they might never find bugs. That's a risk that you have with that approach. So that's kind of the theory, though. It's an academic exercise, really. The problem we have with certification, whether it's narrative requirements or a domain-specific language like Gherkin to drive the behavior-driven development kind of activities, or some other language that we can use to formally capture requirements, we never capture all the information that is reflected in the final product. So we don't usually capture all the navigation paths apart from obvious menu-based navigation through the system. How we enter data into a screen on a GUI application, whether it's a mobile or a web page, the sequence of fields that we access and enter data into is down to the user. Now that is not normally specified in a requirements document. There might be particular constraints that we have to follow, but by and large our specifications do not provide enough detail to generate detailed tests. And there's an end to it. We just don't have the time to write documents to that level of detail. So that's why we need to create a model of the as-built version of the system. And from that as-built model, we can use the tool to derive interesting tests. And of course, the tester can derive useful and interesting tests from that same model too. Does having this tool, this kind of tool, remove or modify the need for test plans? That's a really interesting question, because if you like, a test plan might specify the scope of testing, the features, facilities that you're going to test. It might go down to the level of detail of identifying specific transactions or scenarios that you want to cover in your testing. Now that's fine for scripted testing. But if we had a tool that could track progress, coverage progress for my own tests, and compared with all the other members of the team who are also testing the same system, the notion of test planning changes, I think, because the test plan becomes a set of criteria and we explore in a natural way, in a user-oriented way, let's say, for the sake of argument. But the tool tells us where to go next. That is, it says, you've covered this aspect quite well, but this area of the application hasn't been touched at all yet, so you should pay some attention to that. And if we have an input from production and the logging from an existing system that we are testing new functionality for, the production system in principle can give us ideas for production-like, user journeys. So, and that could be a coverage target too. So our plan becomes less about procedures. It becomes more about goals. It's more goal-based, coverage-based, scenario-based, risk-based. We can actually operate as testers in a much more focused way and led by the tool, but we make all the decisions as humans. So test plans, I think, would change. I think they would be less detailed and they'd be more outcome-based than procedure-based, if that makes sense. How do I see model-based testing tools in relation to the behind-my-back approach? So in the talk, when I gave it, I said in passing, because I had this idea as I was stood on stage, this idea of when I turn my back on the tool, I wouldn't have a problem if the tool decided to run some tests in my absence. Why wouldn't I want to do that? Why wouldn't I want to take advantage of the technology, because it costs nothing to let the tool run some tests that it thinks might reveal some information. And if it found a bug, surely that's a good thing. So how do I see model-based tools in relation to the behind-my-back approach? Is the tool would use the model that's been created. It would use its experience of what I've done personally, manually, if you like, in exercising facilities in the system and a test. But it would use what it knows, and it knows so much more than I do because it has access to all the back-end data of monitoring, all the messaging, the movement of data, the database fields that have changed and so on. It has knowledge that I don't have. So why not take advantage of that? And that's exactly what we want AI, machine learning, to do for us. So I've got no problem with this. Now, in concept, I've got no problem with it. I might have a flag which says, yes, the tool can go and do some exploration of its own, but I might want to turn that off because I don't want to change the current state of the application and the test when I come back to my system and a test. But I think it's an interesting idea to consider that letting the tool to do some exploration as well as it supporting the exploration I do, that is human-based exploration. How do you think your suggested model tool will be impacted by changes in the way your system works? Well, in some respects, there is no change. That is, existing tools from which we build automated tests, let's say, are impacted adversely when the system under test changes. And if you like, if a new field is introduced, my model will be wrong. It will omit that new field. From yesterday's work I did and today's version is different. There's a new field. The model is wrong. However, if the tool builds models as we execute pathways through the system under test, I want my tools to tell me that there's a new field on the screen that I'm looking at today. I want the tool to tell me that the attributes of a field has changed since the tool last tested it. And if you like, the tool may not be doing the testing, but all my manual exercises, all my manual exploration, the human exploration, I want it all recorded. So the tool has all the information it needs, given the system under test, to identify differences in today's version of the system and today's version of the scripts, or yesterday's version of the scripts and the models. I want it to tell me and proactively try and repair the tests. Now, this has been promised for some years, but with procedural code as the media used to record automated tests, this is extremely difficult. But model-based opens the door a little bit towards doing a much more refined approach, from the automation itself to self-repair. Now, of course, it's not going to work all the time, so the human has to be witness and to approve any changes that the tool makes. But I want the tool telling me, not me worrying about what my test scripts are where they are going to go wrong. What happens to your model when the system you're testing changes rapidly? This is a slightly different question. Well, I think if the tool can recognize differences, which in principle it should be able to do, to identify new fields on screen, whether it's doing it through image recognition or by using the domain model, the document model rather, I think it should work faster. So the tool should be able to warn me before I get too far into my day that I'm dealing with a new version of the software, because the tool says I found differences statically by simply looking in its own automated way. I found differences, expect some problems when you come to test this again. If a new field appears, I want the tool to tell me that. And it might be, okay, you've got to go and re-record or re-explore some aspect of the screen you're looking at. Or maybe the tool can make an attempt to repair the model and to adjust the model to accommodate what it's discovered that's new. At any rate, the automation should speed up that process, but give me control, and so I retain control over what the tool does. How do I see the term software development engineering test? I'm not sure, but here's what I think. If testers with some technical insight, that is, they are more technically oriented, let's say, they're not user testers, they are professional test engineers, I would expect that the role of an SDET, the activities of an SDET, would be very well supported by the technologies I'm proposing. And so I think if you want to call your test engineers software developers in test, cool. I mean, it's just a title. I mean, I kind of don't care. But I think if we're going to take on an engineering approach, I think we need technologies that work much closer to the metal, let's say, and we need technologies that record all the data that's available. And our tools should have all that data available in order to provide analyses and interpretations and insights that are going to help me do my job as a professional test engineer. So I don't have a strong feeling about role names, job titles, that kind of thing. SDETs, I think it's closer to the SDET ideal, what I'm talking about, than a functional tester that we would have seen in the past, and still do see, of course. If not quality engineer, what would be a good title for the job we do that brings the most value? Well, I'd like to call a spade a spade. I think the guys who do testing, who take on an engineering discipline, should be called test engineers. Quality to me is a word I prefer not to use. It means too many things to too many people, and it's a qualitative kind of label, let's say. Whereas test engineering is about the construction of, the exploration of systems and the construction of tests that are repeatable, automatable, that are viable, they are meaningful, and so on. So I think I don't need to use the word quality in any description I ever give of what I think test engineers do for a living. What is the nearest tool in the Expo to my dream tool? And do I have any specific tools? Well, I don't want to point any individuals out or individual tools, because I think where we are is what I've talked about is a kind of a vision. I think where we are, there are some tools that are making progress with this concept of model-based testing. Now, by and large, the models are created manually. Let's say they're created by humans. But I'm just going to give a shout out to a few products and suppliers, some of who were in the Expo last week. These are the companies and tools that I'm paying attention to at the moment. I don't want to give any preference to any of them. LeapWork is one. The eggplant tool from Keysight, Curiosity, Tricentis, I think, are doing interesting work. I don't know much about it, but I believe they're working on it. Worksoft and Validator both operate on packages. So Worksoft works with SAP in particular. Validator works on a banking package, T24 I think it's called. And because these packages are very well structured by their suppliers, these companies have created models that map system transactions to actual tables and data changes in the backend database. And so a lot of the model is kind of off the shelf and can be brought into a user of these packages and their test automation tools and their machine learning AI facilities have the data plus a model to provide some interesting insights. And I think that's an advance in our market now. Is there any tool in the market right now which tracks and monitors the tester's exploration path? Not to my knowledge. There are lots of kind of proxy-based tools which capture messages between client machines and servers, HTTP monitors if you like, and obviously network sniffers and that kind of thing. And of course we have tools that capture code-based scripts rather than model-based scripts. Now the suppliers might be ahead of me here, and one or two of the suppliers might already being introducing features to capture models through human exploration and activity through their tool onto the system under test. So I don't want to name any because my knowledge of this is it's moving very quickly, and I think features are appearing quite quickly in this area. How would I maintain an experience-based exploratory test? Well, something I did about 6 years ago is I built a prototype tool which could capture a simple model, in effect a hierarchical structure of features, subsystems, systems and so on. But I experimented with using Amazon Alexa and the facilities that Amazon provide with the voice-activated bot that we all know and love, Alexa, to post transactions to an application which captured a model in real time. So the long and the short of that was, in order for that to work, I had to create a very simple but a kind of if you like, a language, a domain-specific language, to allow me to capture items on the model. So I had to create new elements on screens. I had to create new screens, subsystems, menu items, and if you like, it kind of worked, but it was a bit clunky. But also I had to use this domain-specific language. So I had to define a syntax that Alexa could post through web services to the Amazon infrastructure to generate transactions and data on the models that I maintained. Now, I kind of did this for about a year, had a lot of fun with it, but came to the conclusion that this was a 50-man-year project, not something I could do in my spare time. But voice activation and an interactive conversation with the tools that I'm proposing, where it's talking to me rather than I'm just seeing stuff on screen, I think is just going to add to our experience and increase the leverage we have over what the tools do. So how would I do it? I think it's a combination of real-time capture of what I am doing and what's going on between my machine and the rest of the world, the rest of the landscape, the environment landscape. I want to be able to speak to the tool and make comments. I don't want to be typing comments for sure. I want to capture them and have them translated and put into the model as part of the narrative for that model, and so on. So this is the way I think we will go, but it's going to take time. You have this fantastic idea and really like it. Have you taken any steps to take it to actual development? As I said, I did do some exploratory or prototype work some years ago. And I think there's merit in doing this. Now, in order to take it to what you might call a production-ready application, I think is decades of work. So it could be 50 man-years work or 100 man-years work. It's that scale of development, because the tools I'm envisaging don't exist, although many of the utilities that are available in our marketplace, in our environments now, and many of them being open source, a lot of the building blocks are available now. So maybe it's a pessimistic view to say it's 50 man-years work to build a usable tool. Might be a lot less than that. I don't know, but I'm not a product guy. I'm a services guy. I'm a developer hobbyist, let's say. I'm not a professional developer. If you want that tool, you should build it, maybe. Or are you going to wait until someone will build it for you? For now, I'm waiting. When will I start developing it? Well, again, I've kind of told this slight story where I've had a go at working on a prototype to capture models. And I could produce models, and it kind of worked. But then I got interested in other things. I got busy, and other things get in the way. Life gets in the way, doesn't it, sometimes? Maybe I'll pick it up again. And if there's interest in it, let me know. Maybe I could take it a bit further. But I need more time than I think is a reasonable amount to assign to it. How do we get all those cool tools and ITE? No one seems to build them at the moment. I think the way to play this from the perspective of the testers who need these technologies is we have to persist and ask our vendors, when we're looking at their technologies to procure a test execution tool or a test modeling tool or a test management tool or a test data tool, we have to ask them and be ambitious about the features we need. We need features that they've never built before, and they're not going to build them unless we ask for them. So we have to, if you like, put pressure on the vendors to do the right thing for us and deliver the tools that we really, really would find most useful and effective. Will the tool be a sort of adapting AI? I'm not sure about the English on that one, but what I might have said at the beginning of this little talk, and it's becoming a talk, of course, is the problem we have with machine learning and AI in testing is we don't have access to much of the data that the machine learning and AI require. So, for example, I want machine learning and AI to have access to version control, to access code, to look at the differences in code. I want it to have access to live data, data that's not live, I beg your pardon, data that is accessible through the test environment. I want it to have access to the monitoring tools and real time to know what is being captured by our monitoring and using that data to feedback stuff to the tester to recognize what's going on at the back end, maybe in various locations in our architectures. It obviously has to have access to the tests and test data that I enter manually. It should have knowledge of all the faults that have been raised, the changes associated and the fixes and retesting that's been done, and so on and so on and so on. Machine learning and AI can't do very much for us without all that data. Yes, we can just give it bug reports and that will give us some value, but that's pretty minor compared with the things that it could do if it could have access to all the data. I guess there have been and will come many isms and management tools, but looking over the years, what have been fixed points, if any? I made a little note. I think I'm going to take this question to mean what have been the milestones in the development of automated tools. And this isn't necessarily a very accurate thing, it's off the top of my head. But the movement from character-based terminals to GUIs, Windows and Macintoshes, but mostly Windows, about 30 years ago, was really significant, of course. That transformed what we had to do. Life suddenly became very much more complicated. The whole idea of document object models and also image-based recognition on screens, these are two big things that have helped us tremendously. Life was very difficult until we have mechanisms and standardized mechanisms that provide the synchronization between the tester and the tool and the system and the test. So synchronization techniques, that's really significant. Needless to say, open source products are now, I wouldn't say dominant, but they are pervasive. Most aspects of testing now are supported by open source tools as well as proprietary commercial tools. So, but the development of open source is at such a pace that it's not so far behind the commercial tools. They are typically behind commercial tools, but it's not like they're 10 years behind. They might be a couple of years behind in some respects. So stuff like WebDriver and Selenium have transformed people's perception of test execution automation. We need to take test execution automation into a commodity because it should be free, because it's a very simple and straightforward thing to try and do. Model-based test design has emerged over the past several years. Tools that allow you to build a model of the application of a test, its structure, the layout of fields on screen, and then to use that model to generate automatically pathways through the model and thereby through the system and a test. The last one is the tools that drive package solutions, in particular the ones I've heard of and seen evidence of, SAP and banking. So these would be Worksoft and Validator, their products. They offer a real opportunity, but the thing is, not all of us work in packaged application environments. But they've got a leg up because there is real value in, and there's economies that they have with a package solution that we simply don't have with custom built software. The models created by the vendors in the packaged solution area can be used for many, many customers. Whereas if we're working on a custom built application, we are the only possible customer. So the economics at the moment make it difficult to do these things manually. Is the idea about ITE really a picture of good and proper software engineering? Well, in the talk last week, I did a bit of a rant about whether software development and testing is engineering at all. I think it can be, but it demands that we build in, from the moment we have access to a system and a test, that we build in measurement, monitoring, accountability, traceability, coverage done without us having to do any work, that it's all part and parcel of the way we operate, I think that's the way to go, and then perhaps we can call ourselves true engineers. What are some popular practices or buzzwords we should ban ASAP? Well, I'm not going to dwell on this one except to say I would favour abandoning the word quality as the driver for so many things, because it's so difficult to define and so difficult to pin down. Depending on who you speak to, you will get different definitions. And the definitions are all qualitative. Now, of course, there are qualities, attributes of systems, and those things can be measured and those, having been defined. But overall quality of a system is not something I'm very comfortable with. It's so vague and fluffy. I have a real problem with that. I really want to stick with things that I can identify, define, measure. Am I looking for J.A.R.VIS? Now, I don't think Mr. Stark would give it to you. Now, I had to look this up. Now, I'm led to believe by the internet that J.A.R.VIS, I need to get my little piece of paper up. J.A.R.VIS is just a rather intelligent system. It's the technology that drives the armour in the Iron Man franchise, the movies. That's all I know. I've never seen an Iron Man movie. I guess, yes, I'm looking for an intelligent agent that will be so closely aligned with the way I think as a tester, and J.A.R.VIS would be in the way that you move as a superhero, I suppose. I am looking for a J.A.R.VIS. Yeah, why not? Let's call it that. Why don't we just call it J.A.R.VIS and I'm done with it? Am I related to Steven Gerrard? I had to put this one in because it's a genuine question. The short answer is probably not, or if I am, very distantly. So I come from the same part of the world as Steven Gerrard, but I'm not knowingly a relation in any way. Maybe there's some ancient ancestor a common ancestor that we have, but I've not explored that and probably not going to. So that's it. That's the last one. Thank you so much. I hope you've stuck with me and found this kind of interesting as background to the talk I did last week. Thanks once more for EuroSTAR for asking me, even though they had a problem, for asking me to do a keynote last week. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the show too. Heartily recommend you go to EuroSTAR next year if you possibly can. Thank you. If you want to know more about the concepts I'm talking about in the Glossary of Terms videos, it will probably help you if you take a look at the Leadership in Tests online class that I created a year or two ago. It covers some of the topics in more detail and obviously provides more of a structured approach to explanations of the concepts, and also gives you some idea of how to do some of the things that I talk about. I hope you can take a look at it and get value out of it. The link is below, bit.ly/leadintest.